Hey guys, thanks for joining us for this special spoiler cast of Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I'm joined on the couch by Alex Newhouse.
Hey.
Hey. Mike Mahardy.
Hey.
And Alexa Ray-Korea.
Hey, Mary.
Hey, and I'm Mary. Today we're going to be talking about some serious theories, the overlying story, and everything else that you wouldn't understand if you haven't played Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. So if you haven't played it, go right now and get out of here.
Yeah, don't.
Get out.
Bye.
We'll immediately start talking about everything of the story, and then we'll kind of go in deep dive into what we actually think all of this means. But when you begin, you're kind of just this playable walking character, and the devs have said you're kind of just exploring this area, this completely barren town, and it's kind of this post-apocalyptic vibe, and you're trying to figure out what happened to all these people. So we'll just kind of start out with how the game actually begins and how you guys felt when you just kind of leave. You leave out of this observatory is actually how it begins.
Yeah, you are walking out of the observatory, or you're near it, and you just start walking down roads, and like a phone rings, and you answer it, and like there's people sort of talking like, oh, there's a thing happening, and it doesn't really give you a lot, and then you just immediately find yourself in the first area. Like the whole game is broken into 5 main areas, and in each one there is one person specifically whose mini narrative you're following.
That's true. But the very first person you are hear of is Kate, right? You hear her voice, and you find out who Kate is.
Yes.
Now, who is Kate exactly?
Kate's a scientist who works at the observatory, and at the beginning of the game, you really don't know what the observatory really does. It has something to do with looking into the cosmos and trying to figure out, different scientific things that they want to know.
Observing them.
Yes, observing them.
She's also the only American in the entire game.
Yeah.
Right,
So
which
she's
makes
got
her
this-
feel like an outsider.
Yeah, she's very much like the foreigner. People talk about her that way. She sort of also pulls away from people. Like you see her interact with people throughout the game, or you see the ghosts of her do it, and she's very different. There's
Right.
something very, very different about her.
And what you learn almost immediately in the game is Kate is very married to her work. Like she is very nose to the grindstone, wants to get things done, is very committed to to discovering things and figuring out what's happening.
Right. You're learning who she is through a lot of these tapes that you're finding scattered throughout the area, but you also, as you start to see the people's names and you come across this aura of light, you start seeing reenactments of these people in the light, and one of the very first ones is Kate and Steven, who I believe is her husband. They came here together, and they're fighting. They're already not getting along.
That was unnecessary. Just because you're angry with me doesn't mean you have to take it out on everyone else.
Kate, can we just talk about this?
Steven, I'm done. I just want to get out of this place, and tonight is our best chance of doing that. You prep the arrays, I'm heading up to Tower 6.
Kate. I love you. You know that, right?
Yeah, I know that. Come on, let's get started.
Yeah, and I mean, even just your being in the town after the apocalyptic event has already happened lends to that. One of the first things you see is a barricade blocking off a street, and so you know something has happened. You know this is post the event, and so already then you're going to have to go back and piece together what happened throughout.
That's right. There's clues littered all throughout the area showing something bad has happened, even though there's not a lot of evidence of it. And you find that in the first area. And Alexis, you're saying it's kind of done through various characters. There's 6 total characters: Jeremy, Wendy, Frank, Lizzie, Steven, and Kate. And the very first that you should come across, unless you
Jeremy.
go way off the path, is Jeremy. Jeremy is the village pastor.
Yeah, his story. So, I don't know how you guys felt after finishing Jeremy, but placing Jeremy first as the first story and the first person you talked to made me think that what was happening was, in fact, spiritual in nature, because the way that he sort of framed it and the way he was sort of talking to. There's a conversation right outside of the church where he talks to one of his subjects, and he's talking about trying to be a good man and just trying to shepherd his flock. And she makes a comment about how you can try to be good, but in the end it's what is it even like? What do you care? Like, you can try, but you're not as pious as you seem. And so you follow him throughout the town, sort of.
Seems like people don't like him
No,
very much.
exactly.
people don't like him, and it's really sad because you see him again after you've resolved his story. You encounter him again in other people's memories at later parts of the game, and knowing what happens to him in his story, it sort of makes it really sad. But he's going out and he's checking on everyone, making sure they're all okay. That's when you start finding the bloody tissues on the ground and the dead birds, and it's like, okay. And then his story ends, which I think is probably one of the most, aside from the ending sequence, the most powerful moments in the game is you follow him into the church and up the aisle, and the light, or the ghosts of the light is in the candles alongside the aisle, and he's standing in front of the altar and talking to God, I guess, just being like, all right, that's it, just fucking take me, and he goes. And it's not the first time you see someone go.
Depends.
It was the first time
Depends.
I saw
You,
someone get
yeah.
raptured, which made that event even more powerful. Like this, you are seeing this guy who is a father, who is a member of the church, get dissolve and get raptured as he's kneeling down praying to God. And it was so powerful because it's not like throughout that story he doesn't have the most solid, powerful belief that he's going to heaven or something like that. He's sobbing, he is desperate for some sort of sign from God that he's going to be okay, and then you see him get raptured. And that's that was incredible for me.
You say dissolved. I think one of the scariest things about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is you have no freaking idea how people go. Do they explode and disintegrate? Do they turn into a puddle on the floor and evaporate? The game never shows you because you're just watching points of light.
You're watching pieces of light,
Yeah.
not actual beings. You don't really know
Right.
what
Well,
happened.
It's so terrifying.
The bipedal lights themselves look to dissolve, but that doesn't tell you what actually
Right.
happened.
Right.
It doesn't tell you what happened.
The reason why I default to dissolution is because they talk about how over time, after the nose started bleeding, they start having brain hemorrhages and stuff. Light starts streaming out of their eyes and mouth and ears, and so that kind of made me think that the sort of rapture they're going through is dissolving into light. But obviously, we have no idea what is happening to them, and that's part of the magic.
There's a
of it.
lot of
Yeah.
assumptions that we can make, and we will definitely get into theories in a little bit. But I do think it's interesting to already hear how Jeremy fits into this, right? So there might be theories, especially any religious ones, where Jeremy fits in quite well. He seems like he was raptured, at least in that moment. It felt like he was being dissolved and taken away by God. But I mean, these are all just assumptions.
And there's a part that you two didn't see, but Alexa and I did. That was actually, he was not the first person that we saw dissolve or get raptured or
Who was
whatever.
your first?
There's a rec hall.
The guy in the
where-
basement.
Okay.
You know the
really
hall where they're talking about having an emergency meeting and stuff.
Yes.
Apparently, there's a basement.
There's a
under that?
basement
Yeah,
area, and Jeremy's with him. It's a guy and Jeremy. And the guy starts to go, and he actually pushes Jeremy down the stairs and out of the way, and then
through
he
the
just
spindles, and he breaks his ankle or something.
yeah, and Jeremy breaks his ankle, and that's why up by the church, when you're following his path, you see that discarded crutch. That's from Jeremy.
Oh wow, I didn't even see that.
That's
Yeah.
really fascinating.
No.
And then Jeremy's reaction to it happens 5 feet in front of him, and he's like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah,
And
they're
he's
this
yeah.
far apart.
They're in the light. I can see everyone in the light. Oh my God. Help me.
I thought that one of the reasons why he was so good to start is because he's both an outsider but also the confidant of many of the people in the town.
Yeah.
So he's not directly related to any of the other people you're going to be following, but because he is the father, you get a lot of the confessions about stories that you'll learn about later on. We'll talk about the relationship between Stephen and Lizzie and the problems with Stephen and Kate and all of that, and that's something that you see at the very beginning because the father is that person that people talk to.
That's really
Yeah,
fascinating.
you get the sense that even though he's the pastor of the town. He's not the spiritual leader, which is where that next character comes in, because he has a few conversations with Wendy.
Yeah.
And then she becomes kind of the matriarch of the
She's-
village.
yeah,
I'd say.
She's like
the
the town
matriarch.
mom.
All right.
So yeah, in my story arc, it went from Jeremy into Wendy.
Yeah.
That was my
Same.
next person, who, for reference, we learn is Steven's mother.
Yeah.
And she's trying to find Steven in a few of the stories that you piece together, but she's also going through her own stuff as well.
And
Yeah.
they live in a kind of more remote area of town. You go through the woods to get there,
Yeah.
which is kind of the first break from that small English town vibe you get. It still feels like that, but it's more, you kind of walk past this creek and up through this path, and then you see this pastoral looking house up
Yeah.
there, and that's
And
where you see her.
That introduction is amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Going from Jeremy, and then the music swells, and you hear that just beautiful song. But Wendy,
Yeah.
Wendy's also trying to. One of the first conversations you see of her, she's sitting on a bench with
Lizzie.
talking to her about going out for a drink with Steven because Wendy doesn't like Kate,
Right.
and Lizzie is Steven's ex-girlfriend, and she wants Steven to go back to Lizzie.
Drama. Yeah.
Crazy.
yeah, and this is where you first get the sense that, like, Kate is really an outsider. Like, she's
Right.
the American in this very British, like, insular British town. She's, you know, the woman who's meddling in things but are left untouched up at the observatory.
She's also work focused, whereas Steven wants children. You kind of learn about that later, but obviously his mom has already decided that Kate is no good and Lizzie was the one. So you're right, in that scene, she's trying to convince Lizzie to give it another shot.
Yep.
Yeah, she says, go get.
sad.
She's like, oh, just go get a drink. It could be harmless.
Yeah, and then you see that drink later.
Yeah,
like you
which is
see that
cool.
conversation
That
later.
later in like the 4th act or whatever it is, but.
Right,
Yeah.
and what's really interesting about Wendy's scenes is like that. She's telling Lizzie to go get a drink with Steven while this thing is happening. Like they're just like, it's still, even though there's
Yeah.
this crazy thing they can't explain happening and people are disappearing and ostensibly dying and stuff like that, they're still like, they can't really process it, so they're still like, hey, you should go try to make this relationship happen. And I think that's really powerful as well, like the fact that these people are still just acting like humans in this.
Yeah.
That is the human condition, right? That
Yeah.
even when there is impending doom, you're going to live out your life. What else do you do?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
stop? So they're almost going about things as if they normally would, with just this side of sickness. Now, this is another time to maybe reflect that we're also, throughout these stories, we're starting to learn more about how the town is reacting to this thing, the happening, as we'll call it. And you're starting to find out that people are getting sick. You're seeing tissues with blood on them. I know that I came across a few tape recorders, like in cars and stuff, that were saying, I feel pressure in my cranial lobe, and my nose won't stop bleeding. Scary, scary stuff.
Especially from Kate, who's just saying it very matter-of-factly and not boom, boom, like she's just stating the facts, which is
There are
crazy.
several other people that are also recording their symptoms, and it seems like you start seeing flyers. You see them in the church a lot for influenza. So the town is saying that
It's just influenza.
This is a flu.
And I think that's why they start the quarantine in the first place,
Yeah.
because they think it's a flu outbreak.
Well, we can get into it later why they actually start the quarantine and who triggers it, but
That's
Oh, that's
interesting
right,
too.
that's right, I
So
forgot
we
about
start
that, yeah.
hearing about that, but we'll focus on Wendy for right now.
Yeah.
Wendy's the only character that actually, like, Wendy actually becomes unhinged. Like, at the end of her story, she's walking around telling people, I have to find my son, I have to find my son, and she's holding dead birds. Like, someone makes a comment about how she's holding her
Those
birds.
are her birds.
And
Those are her
right.
birds. And
Oh,
she's
now
like,
I remember
and
that,
she's,
yeah.
yeah.
the area where she actually dissolves or whatever.
There's just dead birds.
No, well, there's also this this cart full of dead birds
Yeah.
tipped over. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought it was laundry.
Walking around with a cart
With a cart
Yeah.
of dead
birds.
birds. She like
Collecting them.
actually loses it, and then the last thing she says is like, she looks up into the sky. She's talking to herself, and she looks up and she's like, "Oh, the planes are coming.
Oh my
There's
God,
planes
that
coming."
scene.
And it's not planes. It's two of those giant jets of light going across
Yeah.
the sky.
Well,
And
I thought it was planes.
Was it
Could be.
planes?
It could
This
be.
is
It
up
could
for
be the planes in the
interpretation.
real world.
Like, because
boy.
later on, like, you see, you know, the
You
streams
see them
of things
dropping
coming down.
things.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's
It
the
could be
airstrike.
planes.
But there's,
could be,
but there's
but
no
no one
bomb
ever-
damage.
Everybody
No,
who's,
but they say they drop nerve gas.
everybody who mentions no, they don't state. Someone says I think it might have been nerve
Okay.
gas because they. But then everybody who mentions the planes only hears them. Wendy sees them because it shows her figure looking up at them, but. Yeah, she says, "Oh, they're coming." It's just like when your
She
dad
thinks she's
died
being
or something.
saved.
Yeah, I
she's,
think-
she's saying,
Yeah.
I'm over here, I'm
Yeah.
over here, and she's trying to get their attention.
If you look up the sky, it's just you can see all the stars,
Yeah.
and then so
Gorgeous.
after people get wrapped, like the main finales for each character arc, there's like this another like really like religious hymn like kind of song comes on, and you're walking this path where the light looks like candles along the way,
Right.
and then it starts to gradually light as you get to the next act, and the person's name comes up.
Yeah.
And I think Wendy's was the first one where you kind of get the sense that different characters are reacting to this very, very differently. Because Wendy's was less spiritual, but it seemed like she was just, or maybe even more so, she was just like blind faith, this is going to save me, whereas, there's a lot more doubt on Jeremy's part.
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
because Wendy was like, Steven, where are you?
And it was
Right
also
towards the
just
end.
like Wendy was heartbreaking, like that scene, just because she obviously was, like Alexa said, unhinged. Like she didn't really.
She just
understand what was
lost it.
happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So we follow these candles down a path. It kind of takes, again, a little bit of a forest path through. And when you come out, it sounds like we start Frank's story, which is what happened for me. I believe you're back on a road path now.
You're in like a farm
leads
area.
to like
Yeah.
a field of barley or something. It was
Yeah.
like
God,
this
it's so
golden-
beautiful.
yeah.
And I know that the first light I saw took me to a tree. And that was the first
and it was
chunk of
pretty
story.
cool
This is the area
conversation
with the windmill.
Yes.
That's
All right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right. So at the tree.
Tree was Kate speaking to Frank, who you later find out was Wendy's brother, so Steven's uncle.
Steven's
I believe.
uncle.
Right. And this is when Kate starts to realize that there's a lot of history she didn't know about between Steven and
And Lizzie.
because she's talking to Frank, and she says, "So what's that bad blood between you and Steven, maybe, or someone?" And then he says, "Oh, that's just between myself and the Graves." Lizzie's last name is Graves, and then Kate's like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And the conversation ends. So you're like, "Oh, what's Kate about to find out?" And that's kind of what spurs on these. You start to get the feeling that everyone in this small town is really connected,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
better or worse.
That's right. He's also with Mary, I believe, who is kind of an off character who finds her way into various storylines.
Yeah.
But we don't learn too much about Mary.
Yeah, he's married to her, and then there's a few mentions of a funeral throughout the first couple acts, and you don't know who died, but then you find out in this act, and this is the act that really crushed me because of the ending, but you find out that Mary was, I don't know if it was related to the nosebleeds or if she was just already sick. Because people keep saying the funeral, and you get the sense it really impacted a lot of people in some way, but they're also kind of talking about it in a way that they don't really want to go into detail. They say
Yeah.
it in passing as if it's still kind of fresh,
Yeah.
especially for Frank, because there's also a conversation between him and maybe Charlie, and he says, I'm assuming you want to go meet up at the pub, and he says, "Yeah, this drink's on me." And every time a few characters say, "Frank, watch your drinking and stuff," and
Yeah.
then you go to a pub, and then you kind of, in the farm, you're still kind of walking around the Appleton farm. I think it was Frank Appleton, his Steven's uncle, but you start walking between all the different barns in the farmhouse, and you kind of figure out that it was Frank's wife, Meg, who was dying. And then in his house, up at the top floor, you see like a hospital bed they had installed.
Yeah.
And then there's
Oh
a
my
conversation
God.
between the doctor and
Yeah.
Frank,
Yeah.
which was that's when
That
you're
is
like,
really
oh,
brutal.
This
I
is
remember
the-
him saying
yeah.
it's been 8 months. It's time
okay.
to get
It's time
this
to get this
equipment.
out of here. Yeah.
Okay.
Because she had died, yeah. So the reason they were talking about it was, I believe, because the character Frank had not let it go.
Forget it. I'll see her. Leave it to me. Oh, and Frank, call the hospital and get them to collect all this stuff. It's been 8 months.
In Frank's house and in the barns, did you guys find all of the empty liquor bottles?
Yeah. and
It's
that's-
just like everywhere.
That's
There's like
great. It's a
no-
great character trait because they allude so much to his alcoholism.
Yeah.
They're showing pieces of it. This is also where you start seeing, I remember seeing a small story about how Jeremy the preacher had come back into one of the houses, was like, "I was just going to check on you because we've had some reports of elderly people disappearing." And you're like, well, that's interesting. So you start to realize this is much bigger than the characters that you might be following. And people are scared now. The entire town is starting to basically freak out because
Yeah.
people are walking up and not coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, you kind of eventually, speaking of Frank's alcoholism, you find out what, if not triggered it, what kind of spurred it on or encouraged it with his finale, which is the one that really made me like, wow, this
So
is
let's talk
You
about that.
walk-
That's the windmill
Yeah,
finale.
you hear the air raid sirens, which is another
Yeah.
reason why I think it's airstrikes. But you walk up towards the windmill.
Also, I do agree with you with the airstrikes because this from the hilltop where Frank was, so the windmill is overlooking his entire farm.
Yeah.
You see the light, the streaks, like jet streams come. They look, the lights, and then but they drop. You see kind of, he's got this double barrel shotgun leaned up against like a skeet shooter, I think. And then there's a chair there, and I think there's a bottle of liquor there, but this is where you first hear him talking about how Meg died. Essentially, she was said, I think the words were like, I'm afraid, but if you face it with me, I'll be okay. Instead of being with her, he went to the bar to get drunk. Which you start to realize that. I was like, oh my God, I felt
Frank.
awful for
Yeah.
Meg, A. But then during this finale, Frank's like, I think I'm finally ready to face it, and he looks out toward where the lights are kind of crashing into the ground, and he just disappears.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where I realized things were a lot more messed up than I had originally thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really dark. So I actually never got that ending. That was one that I never
His
got.
story is hard. Finding all of his
Yeah.
stuff is like really difficult.
And that really changes the character for me
Yeah.
because I always just didn't. I don't know. When you don't find out that he wasn't with his wife at her
Yeah.
death, that changes
Yes.
his story of redemption, basically, of someone who's quite ashamed.
Yeah, he comes to
and then-
grips with it.
And then comes to grips with it right before he disintegrates, which is really
Yeah.
fascinating considering all the religious themes
Yeah.
of this, that he
Yeah.
had to come to terms with it and then
Penance.
and then interestingly enough disappears. So
Yeah.
there seems to be a common theme. So moving on after Frank, this is when we start getting to some. This is a very interesting area. It's got like playgrounds
Yeah.
and stuff.
It's
This
like
is
a
it's a
trailer
camp.
park.
It's a
like-
camp.
It's a
Lakeside.
camp.
But it's
Summer-
also
Lakeside, yeah.
it's also got like a part where it's like trailer park, like all the.
And
It's
people
very.
can camp. Is maybe
Those
what
are like
it
mobile
is.
homes, though.
You get the sense that
on
this is
them,
where a
right?
lot of the
Yeah.
people during the quarantine escaped through the quarantine or at least escaped out of the town. Because a lot of them mentioned that, like, oh, we drove fast enough to get by the quarantine.
There
or
is
something.
the caravans
Yeah.
are in there as well.
Interesting. And this is where we find out a little bit more about Lizzie.
yes.
Lizzie
A
is
lot of characters in
yes.
this part, right?
Yeah.
Lizzie is Steven's love interest, and this is when you learn a lot about that
Right.
as well.
They used to be engaged.
Well, they were.
Yes.
They used to
yeah,
be
that was
engaged.
his first love.
He left, found Kate. Did you find the Kate tape where she says, "I knew he was sleeping with her"?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I think Steven came back and that after that one drink, like, and you see the drink happen, and it's kind of awkward at first, and then they're talking, and she gets up to leave, and he's like, "No, stay, like, have a drink." Like, they totally started sleeping together.
Of course.
Well, in one of the campers, I saw them talking about them sleeping
Yes.
together. There was one. This was very weird to me too because up until this point, I was a little bit rooting for them, like I don't know, just a foreign love, and then Lizzie's very, very worried. She's very concerned about Steven, and she's asking all these questions about him and Kate because they work together. And he goes, "I'm sorry, are you sleeping with Kate or are you sleeping with me?" And I was like, "Well, I don't like you anymore."
And like they
kind of a prick about it.
And those scenes in those trailer homes, for one thing, they're super like close quarters, which is
Yeah.
interesting. But also they're very clearly in an established relationship, Lizzie and Steven. Like he says, "Yes, of course I love you, Lizzie." Like it's a very
Come
clearly.
to bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is no ifs or buts about
Right.
that.
Yeah.
They're totally doing it.
Yes.
And that's
But
when I was like, "Fuck Steven."
Yeah.
Like, Steven, no.
he's a very tortured person. To like go back a smidge at, I think Frank's story. I do remember seeing Steven's mother, Wendy. Frank's showing her a house, and he's like, "What do you think about this? Like, this is where the kids' room could be, or something." And she's like, "If you want kids, then you should be with Lizzie because
Yeah.
Kate doesn't want kids." And he's like, "Damn it! Why can't you just be happy for me, and you
Yeah.
can really start seeing the inner turmoil. He also says something really interesting about how it's like she has other worlds inside her head, which I'll get to later.
boy.
But
No one else
he-
understands, but me.
Nobody else understands her but me, which is really fascinating. But you can see how even though he defends her very much in that scene, he is quite torn.
Yeah.
He
He's
is
making
torn.
excuses for her,
That's
basically.
right. He believes in her, and he is obviously enamored with Kate, but his heart, when it comes to being a family man, is with Lizzie, who probably wants to settle down.
Sorry, it's just that you have to understand. Kate is the most brilliant, extraordinary, wonderful person I've ever known. She's like no one else. The way she looks at things. It's like she has whole worlds inside her head. I don't think you or anyone really understands that.
At the end
Someone
of Lizzie's
does.
story,
Is
Someone has a
Rachel
child.
her child?
That's what I was wondering because she says something about her mom at one point, and
I
then
think Rachel is her
Rachel.
child.
I think so
Or-
too.
Because there are a lot of snippets in Lizzie's area that are just between Rachel and Charlie.
yeah, which only makes sense if it is a non-linear story because at one point, when Lizzie at the end of this, not to jump ahead, but when she does Rapture, she says, "I'm taking the baby and leaving," which I think the way she says it is as if she's still pregnant because she's definitely not holding the baby. The way she talks about it, she kind of hints at maybe the fact that she's about to have the baby when she's talking to Steven on the phone or leaving a message for him. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Maybe she just became pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Because
think,
of them sleeping together.
I think
So
she
which-
has a child though.
Which-
Which beyond that?
but if she's still talking about being pregnant when she gets raptured, then
Yeah.
there's no way Rachel's her child.
Right. I don't
Yeah.
know.
But that's when the camp became kind of confusing. 'Cause there's a lot of characters who
There's a
kind
lot
of
of characters.
There's a lot going on in that camp. That camp
And I
was
mean,
like,
the camp is where the emergency meeting happens as well, and I think later, maybe, and also they always talk about the Peter Pan show that they want to put on to keep the kids engaged.
yeah.
and that's where
oh.
I did see a post show there in the theater area
Yes.
is when there's a big chunk of story.
That's the finale.
That's
too.
right.
yeah, that's because you kind of wander and you see the spotlight on the stage. I was waiting for something to happen, but then the camp being so nonlinear and exploring it, I kind of took a while there trying to find how to get to the finale. Turns out you had to go back to the beginning of the area, kind of.
You hear.
You
if
have to
trigger
follow
enough,
that map. Did you
yeah.
check the map at the beginning? Because it has on the buildings 1, 2, 3, 4,
I
like
didn't even
1
see
through
that.
14. If you follow that exact map, you'll find everything.
That's really interesting.
found
it's
enough-
really well
Right.
done.
I found enough. Like I had gone into it at the beginning as well and just looked around, seeing if anything triggered. But then after I went around the entire circle, I heard the intercom saying, "Hey, everybody, come
to the main hall."
Come to the main hall."
Yeah.
Right.
It's also, there's like a laundromat scene, kind of, or a laundry room scene where you
Yeah.
find out that Lizzie is sort of crippled. She has a bad hip.
Yeah, she has
Which
like
I didn't know up until then. It doesn't affect it too much, but Frank comes to repair the dryer washing machine or something and is talking to her, and he says, when you're going to settle down, you do far too much work. And I think the way she says it, she's the one that started the summer camp, or at least really developed into how big it was. It's pretty
Yeah.
sprawling, but
Yeah.
she says, like, look around you, I built this. I never needed Steven's help. Just
Right.
because my hip's messed up doesn't mean I can't still accomplish things. And
yeah, it's really sad.
that was a scene
Yeah.
I kind of wandered past, and then that's the last one I saw before I went back to the play.
That's fascinating because that really helps establish her character.
Yeah.
The hip injury doesn't really mean anything in itself, but what she was saying through that was, I did this alone.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows that she never moved on.
Right.
She didn't do she didn't like need anyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She accomplished a lot, and she's really confident in herself. But there was obviously still a flame there,
Right.
because they ended up getting back together anyway.
I think
Yeah.
that scene was confusing though, especially since a lot of it did focus on Rachel. Like there was a lot of scenes with her, and not like I thought there were some scenes without Lizzie at all, which was weird. And so like it was, I don't know what you guys thought of the finale, but even that was it felt a little just out there.
Her story I felt was not as strong, and I was left with a lot of like really like very open questions. But then the next person you get to is Steven, and that's sort of
That
when
is, yeah.
everything started to
That
make
brings you
sense.
back. I really like that you brought that up because I also felt displaced in the story after Lizzie. I started feeling like there was too many characters for me
Yes.
to understand, and I felt like they had lost me. It got to a point where I actually thought, I don't know where I am anymore. There's just so many characters. Who the hell is Rachel? Like, what am I doing here? I can't keep track of all these people. And then Steven comes up on screen, and I'm like, oh, I know Steven.
Here we go.
And it pulled me back in. So they did a good job of putting Steven and Kate last because, of course, you start out with them, and it makes you want to end with them. So if nothing else, they hooked me back with that. So we go into Steven's story now.
And they kind of do another scene where he's using white paint to mark things, which he's been doing since the first act.
Right. How do you prove that it is him doing it?
Maybe the second mention of Steven was he was painting the windows in the hardware store at the beginning, and people came up and said, "Steve Appleton, what are you doing?" You kind of get the sense the entire game that everybody thinks he's going crazy. And when he spills the white paint at one point, right outside the hardware store, it goes into this weird symbol right away, and everybody's like, what the hell is this? It's like this infinity kind of symbol.
Yes.
Well, there's also another scene where it was definitely Steven painting, because you go into this warehouse later on, and this was kind of, I felt really bad for Steven. He is painting, and someone stumbles across him and says, oh, you're the one that's been vandalizing everything and stealing. And he says, no, it really wasn't me. So I think the guy's name was Sam. He grabs him and tries to pull him out, and in defense, you see a hammer with blood everywhere.
Oh my God, that scene
He
is so
accidentally
rough.
kills someone, and it's
then
like,
her
husband. No, his wife.
Amy, I think.
Yeah.
I think this is Amy, comes in and says, what the hell did you do? And then she leaves the warehouse screaming for Charlie to come help her or something, and Steven, after she left, you hear Steven start to cry at the door.
Oh my God, that scene.
There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that are starting to come together here, and you can see it because earlier on, I think it was like a car repair shop, and they're like, someone took all of our stuff, like it's all gone, and they blame Appleton later because he's in the warehouse at the wrong time. So you start to see things that you saw evidence of much earlier in the game have consequences, very dire consequences later on, which is really interesting. You're starting to see all these interconnecting pieces.
Yeah, this is also where you get the full phone clip of where Steven and another man are talking about the airstrike. Steven tells, when Steven orders I guess it's someone running the quarantine or something, or like, I don't know exactly who he's talking to, but Steven tells him to order an airstrike.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he says, and the guy who Steven is talking to says, what you're asking me to do is sacrifice my family. And that clip is what you hear earlier on in the game. All you hear is that going into a dialogue about that, and you don't know what it's referring to. And this scene is when you get the full...
You hear the other half.
Where Steven says, you need to order the airstrike.
Yeah, he keeps saying, everybody needs to realize the point of having a choice is long past or something.
Yeah.
Steven's story is also where Steven realizes that whatever that light is traveling in the wires.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of all that static that's coming up in the phone. And he's like, it's traveling in the wires, get off the phone, like stuff like that.
Right. So people throughout the game have been referencing this as well, right? Get off the phone, you can't leave the town, don't come in physical contact with anyone who is showing symptoms. And all of a sudden you're starting to realize it's broader than that. It's traveling possibly through radio waves, which is a common theme as well. So you're starting to realize this is where people start thinking this is much broader. Everyone probably already thought this is not the flu, but people didn't know what it was. Now you're starting to think it's like an entity.
Yeah, this is where you get people saying
aliens.
This is
now
where you get,
this is where the aliens thing comes in.
This is when it starts.
Yes, this is where you get people saying, like, is it alive? Like, it's morphing, it's evolving.
Kate's starting to say that.
It's scared, it's alone.
Yes.
I'm like, oh my God.
And this is where where I started feeling a lot of sympathy for Steven, because he was starting to have to make insane calls. Like, for whatever reason, he was put in charge of a lot of this stuff. And like, he was having to say, it's morphed to be able to go over the wires. It might go more. We have to stop this now.
Right.
I don't know that he was put in charge. I think he took charge because he was the one that called in the airstrike, sort of.
He also felt a huge amount of responsibility. I mean, him and Kate had called it in. He had been a huge part of getting the towers together. Now, there was a point, and I believe it's probably when he starts seeing people getting hurt, that he goes, this has gone too far, and I'm stopping it, which is why him and Kate are fighting in the very beginning.
Yes.
Because she doesn't think it's gone far enough.
She doubles down.
Also, I think
she doubles down on it.
He thinks that it was, if not both of theirs, that maybe Kate's fault for being so, like, or at least both of their fault for being so curious with all this stuff in the observatory. And I think someone says, I think it might have been Wendy in the second act, says, for some reason, Steven thinks all this is his fault. and I think maybe he felt guilt
Yeah.
and responsibility.
Right. Plus, he
His-
killed a dude.
Yeah.
his last like his final sequence where you finally get into the bunker and you're going through the bunker and he's talking about how as a child his dad had a pet fox.
Yeah.
And one day he brought the fox food and the fox bit him and the dad beat him to death. Beat the fox to death. and he starts crying and he said, and at that point I was sort of trying to not like I didn't really have an idea of like what that light stuff could have been. I'm like, maybe it's aliens and maybe they're killing us, but then Steven says it didn't know it was hurting me.
Yes.
And I just got this revelation of like, oh, like maybe this stuff is like and then Kate says in a tape, I think the next one you find is like, it's traveled so far.
Right.
It's scared. And it's like, is this like a lost like entity from somewhere that like is trying to like settle on Earth and is not compatible with human beings? So it's like
Maybe
destroying
and they're
us?
also defending said entity, you know, that maybe it's not malicious, maybe it doesn't understand.
It doesn't
Yeah.
know.
Regardless of the fact that it is hurting people.
Right.
I think we should transition into Steven's finale and then Kate.
Sure.
Yeah, because
So,
you're hearing
like-
the story of the
Yeah.
fox as you're walking extremely
The
slowly
first-
down a hallway.
Exactly. The last thing I saw before going to the bunker was Kate confronting Steven and telling him, "Hey, I know you're with Lizzie," and then them getting into an
Yeah,
argument.
she says, "You
Yeah.
didn't think I'd find out? I'm not stupid."
Right.
Yeah.
And she's like, you're not going to ruin this for me. And
Right. And
Yeah.
that was interesting. It's not a huge problem for me, but I didn't think that the love interest had a great ending for me. It wasn't that rewarding for her to say that. And to me, the love interest helped me get through Lizzie's story, but then that was its only purpose. I didn't really care after that.
I think it was
Well,
just the
that's-
humanity of it. Like
You're probably
this
right.
thing,
Yeah.
like he is having an adulterous relationship,
Right.
which is something so incredibly human in the face of something so incredibly not human.
Right.
And that's what it did for me.
That's also not the end of Kate and Steven's story, because when Steven is sitting in that room with the lighter and he's talking to it, you see the ball of light and he's addressing
Like
it.
it's
He's,
just
like,
you and
pissed
me.
at it.
Everyone
Yeah.
else is gone.
But then he says, he's like, I'm not, and you see the kerosene on the ground and he's like, the scorch marks.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're not taking me with you, which makes me wonder if that light, when it destroys your human body, you join it in some way. But he stands up and he goes, Kate? And he reaches for the light that you have unlocked and then drops the lighter and you just watch him slow motion go up in flames.
Except
I thought
his
he
body
dissolved.
isn't there. He gets raptured
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
he
As
goes
the
on
match
fire.
well, his body
dropping somehow.
falls.
But he still gets raptured.
I thought his body dispersed
Yeah.
That's
as the match was
debatable.
falling. Yeah.
That's debatable whether or not you can make that assumption, I
But
think.
then when Kate is talking, and when you talk to in the observatory, when you hear her talking, she says, I saw him at the end and I wasn't angry. So they saw each other.
So let's
Yes.
transition
as he
into
died.
Kate.
Yeah.
So
Which
So-
I think the game would have been. This is jumping ahead, but I think that right there should have been the end of the game. I thought it was a perfect ending.
I don't know,
didn't
like,
need a sixth act.
I can
at
see
all.
that. I was thinking it was going to end there, but I also like when you get out of the bunker and you're in the observatory and you see all 6 or 7 towers. I think it's 6 at that point.
There was-
6
they
towers.
were-
Tower 6,
They were
Tower 6,
protesting-
Tower
Theme.
6. Kate's in
Yes.
Tower 6. I'm going to Tower 6. All right,
Yes.
we're going to end this game in
got
Tower 6.
it.
They were
Yeah.
protesting.
Also, when you turn on all the TVs, it's the same.
It's the same thing. It's Tower 6.
Yes.
yeah.
And they
it's-
were protesting the construction of a 7th
Yes,
tower,
you're right.
which plays into my theory about the game. We'll talk about
Okay,
But,
all right.
yeah. So like you're at the bottom of the hill, and to your right is like Observatory 1. You go
Right.
into the observatory, and you have another one of the radios where Kate has left an audio log
Right.
with all sorts of formulas written on the ground, and you listen to her start talking about this, like her experience. Like this is where you get a lot of specifics about what she was doing in the observatories and her experience meeting this thing. And so
But the way that that final area is set up is so bizarre. Like you walk into the first parking lot or whatever of like the first tower, and not only has she left the recording device on a table, but there's all these like mirrors and like lights set up, so when you play the recording, the lights bounce off each other and like form a thing. And then you go into another parking lot and there's TVs all on the ground and hanging from the tree, and it's like she went out into the observatory and like brought all these electronics together and fiddled with everything and like set up these stations and wrote these equations on the ground trying to figure out what's going on. And then you walk into the last tower and the tower is completely devoid of anything but a chair and a table.
Yeah.
Like she emptied out the observatory trying to like figure out what was going on.
Trying to channel this thing.
Yeah.
Well, she was trying to make another tower because she didn't have enough power.
Right.
So she was trying to figure that out. But she's talking, very ambiguously throughout in all these tapes in each tower. You're starting to learn more pieces about what's happening to her. This is where you start to get concerned about her. She's talking about all her symptoms, how she's passing out, and weird stuff like that. But she's also talking about giving us more hints about the entity and how she feel like it's traveled here, and that there's a lot about connections of it with her. She has a responsibility now to make sure everyone is understanding that the light is good.
Yes.
And that it's for the best. She's already fought with Stephen because he thinks it's malicious and she believes that it's good. And when you start to enter the final tower, I think is where you get the biggest chunk of what she believes is actually happening.
And so she, like throughout this, she's talking about how alone she feels and how she started seeing people pairing off and having these, like having that incredible sense of love. And then she gets into that like final tower and she has this revelation like, hey, like I have this with the patterns. I have this, like I have that sort of sense of love with the thing. And that's when she's like, she gives herself to it in a sense.
Yeah, she looks up and the observatory roof opens and the light pours through and like kind of envelops
This is
her.
very fascinating. And during this time is the first time, because you are in first person going up to that tape recorder, but when that plays out, you are now seeing it from a different perspective and you're seeing her glow, which makes you feel like you are her, if nothing else, at least for that observatory part, right? I mean, we'll get to the theories. You don't know who's walking around the entire area, but I believed I was her during the observatory section because you literally touch the tape and then you look at her. So it looks like you were her at that time.
But I think we should talk a little bit more about what she says in that time.
Yeah.
So like she's talking, it was a lot of, sort of ambiguous but also very profound talk about how this thing's filling a void and like, light ties everyone together, but at the same time it'll consume you. And like, I don't know what you guys thought about that.
I don't know, that game made me like, you saw me trying to write my review, I was getting teary, like it really emotionally affected me. I think sort of, if you want to like ascribe like a moral to this game, it's everyone dies alone, but we're not alone. It's like this weird duality of like, like in the end, like,
She talks about the driftwood. We're driftwood in the beginning and we're going to be taken out by a wave, but it's the moments in between.
Yep.
So it is the relationships that we build with each other that bring us to the light.
Which is weird because that's a very kind of atheistic life view as opposed to a lot of the religious overtones that the game's had so far, which I guess...
It's very nihilistic too, which is interesting as well. And I think she talks at one point about how like that wave will take everyone out and like that light, if you embrace the light, it'll destroy you. But like it was all about how she like saw that people were finding redemption in themselves and in their relationships.
Also that we live on in the light as well. If you find the light, you never truly die. Your memories or your relationships, those connections that we make, live on through the light, which is very ambiguous. I'm not entirely sure, especially considering how literal the light has been this entire game. So is the light, when she refers to that, is that this little dude I've been following, or is the light in us this whole time?
Do you think that you are the little dude? I have a theory that the person you play as, or the thing that you play as, because there are the sound of footsteps as you walk, so you make noise. You can turn things on and off, and you can open doors, and you cannot interact with anything else. And I have a theory that because of that perception change at the end, that you are Kate as she has assimilated with this light. So what is left of Kate is moving through this world, sifting through what happened, because she's been locked in the tower the entire time. So this is her being like, what the hell happened out here?
I also think it's Kate, and the reason why I think it's Kate is because those radios and the phone calls and her audio logs make sense for her to be basically like somehow having some sort of foresight that she's going to meld with this thing and lose her memories, and like that's how I got it. Like she is returning and trying to find the humanity throughout this after she's melded with this thing. And so, I think it's Kate. I think the light is the thing, like the light you're following around is the thing that might be, melded, like all of the people melded together, stuff like that. But ultimately, I believe it's Kate. But Mike,
You've got an interesting theory with the
a
tower.
really interesting theory about who it is. And
So just because the game's called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture being, back in high school, we're doing some sort of project where we're comparing like pop culture to, mythical or biblical or whatnot kind of stories. And the Book of Revelations in the Bible is about like theories, supposed prophecies about the apocalypse. And which plays into this, but the rapture being pretty much what happens when the dead and the good people on earth are brought up to heaven or whatever, and it's about like it's kind of like Judgment Day you hear about, and also I just was curious because it all sounded really familiar, so I looked it up and like on Wikipedia, just really cursory, and a lot of the similarities between what happens in that part of the Bible and what happens in Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. There are a lot of weird similarities. There's supposed like one of the telltale signs of the apocalypse coming is, I think an angel or something will sound a seventh trumpet, which the seven is littered throughout Rapture. The name of the bar is the Seventh Whistler, which sounds like a seventh trumpet. Kate wanted a seventh tower really bad because she thought that might finally let her figure things out, and also the rest of the town is kind of protesting against the seventh tower. There's a bunch of sevens, like just numbers written throughout, and also the weird thing about the Book of Revelations is the person who supposedly wrote it, the author. His name was John, but no one knew anything about him and like where he came from. And then if you look at flyers throughout the town, and someone mentioned it, there's an elderly man named John missing, and no one knows where he went. And so I was looking at those posters, like that sounds kind of eerily familiar. And also there's a part where it mentions like everyone will return to their first love. And I was like, oh, that sounds like Steven and Lizzie. So it was kind of, again, that's just one way to look at it. Like, that's how I think Father Jeremy looked at it. That's how Wendy looked at it, as something religious, and that this was the rapture.
Right.
Other people, I think, more with secular beliefs in the game, were kind of looking at it as, maybe like some sort of disease. You think like the influenza or something weird that's spreading through foam layers, or like I think a few of you thought like
Sci-fi.
I think it's
whatnot.
alien, but
Like I don't know. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I had also thought maybe it's possible, because you want to know who you are playing as, right? It could be Kate. Another option would be you're a non-believer, because non-believers are left on the ground.
Right, that's what I
So
thought.
if you're a non-believer, now you're there with all the ghosts of everyone who were raptured, and it's before the shit goes down, and after everyone is lifted, and you are stuck amongst the spirits of people who decided, or who are able to be raptured, which is really, really dark if you think about it. You're this non-believer who's roaming the
only
the
non-believer.
world.
Yeah, one of the scariest parts of that game is wondering if you're gonna walk into a house and find human remains. Like I spent that whole game being like, when am I gonna find a body? When am I gonna find a body? And you never find a body. And it's just that like dread of thinking that there'll be a body there.
Yeah, and I actually think Mike's theory about John is particularly interesting. Like the idea of someone being marked as sort of like the chronicler, and then walking through, like being left, like disappearing from the town, and then being left to like chronicle all of the events.
The witness.
That's pretty fascinating.
Is like, that's super dark as well in a way.
I thought one of my possibilities, which it doesn't have nearly as much evidence as Mike's, but what I thought was interesting was how enamored Steven was with Kate, and how he had mentioned she has other worlds inside of her head, and the whole town is against her and says she's an outsider. And my thought was, Kate is an alien. She is the alien. And she is been this beacon of light this entire time, which is why people don't like her. They're afraid of her.
Yeah.
But Steven trusts her and loves her. And when people start getting sick, that's when Steven is starting to get concerned of it, but she never has concern because she is the light. Steven has no idea that she is actually this complete alien until he has the lighter, and when he sees her in the light, it clicks to him that she was the light this entire time, which is why
Yeah.
he kind of like
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
freaks out. And so you are the alien walking around the entire time, and you're basically surveying the land that you've just affected, for better or for worse. You don't know if your alien is actually malicious or not. I would assume that it just didn't know any better. And you're surveying the damage that you caused to the world inadvertently.
Right.
But nevertheless, this has all happened because of you and what happened and how you affected people's lives. So
Yeah.
it's kind of another interesting option. Alien.
Yeah, and I mean,
don't know.
like, I think what's great about this story is, like, it almost doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
What matters is the conclusions that people come to and the conclusions that you as a player come to. And, like, one of the main reasons why I'm so fascinated with apocalyptic fiction is, like, especially in this game, it's all about what people do when confronted with that that insane conclusion that they're gonna die, or like something is happening to them that is so far out of their control that they can't even comprehend it. And as they start seeing people being raptured, like, how do they respond to that? And I think that's the most fascinating part of this game, is you see like the realist humanity in these people that, you know, regular life can't really provide.
Right. Do they think about their loved ones? Do they think about the cause of it
Right.
scientifically? Do they go immediately to God?
Do they go immediately to alcohol, like that sort of thing? You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's fascinating. I think this game did a really good job of doing that as well. Even if, you know, some people, like, I think you came out of it like not really fully satisfied with the conclusions that it comes to. But
yeah, so after the theories, unless there was any other theories I missed that we wanted to talk about, was basically the praises and then maybe where the game fell short for some of us. I know.
The walking speed.
Yeah, we
Just get out of the way.
Regardless of R2, I don't care. Like, it was too
It's
So you
still,
wanted
it's
to
still
talk
too
about
slow.
walking speed?
R2,
so slow.
Because I
R2
will
is still
defend
too
the walking
slow.
speed.
I mean, I understand that like they wanted us to go really slow because they're worried about pacing and they want people to like be encouraged to like take their time to explore everything. But holy crap, there was a moment near the end of the game where I was like, I think I missed something, and I walked from the station back
Right.
to the observatory, and it took me like 20 minutes, half an hour. And then when I went back and played with R2, it was still not slow enough, and like,
You're fast.
and like, it's still not fast enough. And like, in no way would I have thought holding down a specific button for 5 seconds for a gradual ramp up would mean that I'd be moving faster. I really didn't
Well,
like the
the
speed.
developers have admitted that that was a mistake on their
Yeah.
part, but even if it was in the control scheme, like, let's just assume they didn't make that error
Yeah.
and give them the benefit of a doubt. I also felt it was punishing to the degree that if I missed something, I
Yep.
actually, the reason I never saw the windmill scene was because I had that light there, and then I left, and I was like, I'm not going back there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like 30 minutes out of the way for me to hope that I missed something. I actually saw less of the game. The developers would probably argue, and who knows, that they make this walking speed so slow so they become immersed in the environment. But I thought that
Yeah.
it became a detriment because I stopped actually trying to investigate things because I knew it would take too long to go back.
Yeah,
I like wanted to
Right.
continue.
And
it's tough.
I wanted to move on.
I'm the one of us four that actually was totally fine with the walking speed. Although, to be fair, like, I think they're, like, if we're going with Mike's idea that it's John, then, you know, there's a story justification. You're an elderly man, can't walk very fast. But,
Nor can you sprint very fast.
right, exactly. But the reason why I was totally fine with it is, like, the first 5. So this is getting into what I love about games. It was like the first 5 minutes it was annoying to me, and then I realized, then I accepted the fact that it was going to be slow, and at that point I just gave up caring about the objective at all, and instead just like walked through the town, and that was super liberating for me. Like, I loved the fact that it basically was just like a wander through this countryside. That I love that sort of game. Like, one of my favorite games is Proteus. Like, you're just literally walking through an island. There's nothing to do, and the fact that it was so slow and the fact that it forced me to just accept the fact that I wasn't going to be able to find everything, and I wasn't going to be able to just sprint around the entire map going from objective to objective, let me feel my presence in that town more.
I think that you
Frank,
represent a very particular type of gamer who is perfect for this game. And I think I represent a different type of gamer that, and there's nothing wrong with either of them,
Right.
that didn't feel that way. I like to interact with my world or feel like I have some stake in the game that I'm playing, they removed every ounce of control that I could have besides where I walk, to the degree where all you can focus on is the story. And to me, that story did not hold enough water for me to care about what was happening. And I lost myself several times. I mentioned this previously with the end of Lizzie's story, where I was like, you are starting to lose me.
Yeah.
I actually don't think I care what happens to Lizzie. I've already established that Steven's a dick, and I don't really care what happens to Steven.
Yeah.
So my only job in this game is to walk around and find out what happens to these people. I better want to know what happens to these people. And I didn't always feel that way. And I did want to, we were talking about this earlier,
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating. I was talking about why don't I give a shit? Because you should, right? They have all these emotions, they're going through all this stuff. This lady was holding a bunch of birds, she's going nuts. Why didn't I care about her? And I think a lot of that, for particular types of people, myself included, I connect emotionally to people's faces. And these elements of humanity are in their being, their mannerisms, their characteristics. And because they were represented
Yep.
as light, I never got connected
Right.
to any of them. And I think that might have been to me, where they lost me. If they would have had faces or beings, maybe I would have really cared about these people and what happened to them.
Yeah, so also I think the structure of the game, as far as being a little more open than their earlier titles, as far as Machine for Pigs and Dear Esther go, or even any games of this nature, it's kind of, the fact that you can go anywhere you want kind of conflicted with following the lights for me, so I was always torn between trying to explore every house and every like nook and cranny, and also getting the story that I thought they wanted to tell me. And you know, the walking speed also played into how much I explored, which you were just talking about, but I also just really felt this weird binary system between actually experiencing a good story and kind of trying to explore this world, and I don't necessarily feel as if it was kind of meshed that well, but maybe that was just me, I don't know.
Well, I mean, regardless of how you might feel, anyone who's played Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is certainly left with feelings. They can be good, they can be bad, you can have theories for pretty much everything that you experience, but without a doubt, it does leave you thinking, and that's something that we all have to admit, for the better or for the worse. So that's probably going to be it for this. I want to thank you guys for joining us, and thank you guys for watching. But we had one more little tidbit that Alex found. If you want to explain it, we'll end on that.
Yeah, so I think that one of the main things that everyone really has come away with is something that's summed up in a quote that is decoded from numbers at the end of Everybody's Gone to the Rapture's credit, which is a quote from a scientist named Douglas Hofstadter.
So this is found from
The credits.
numbers and the end of the credits.
Yeah, of course.
And
the
he
cipher.
decoded it.
Yes, it's a cipher in the numbers. And so the quote from Hofstadter is, "In the wake of a human being's death, what survives is a set of afterglows, some brighter and some dimmer, in the collective brains of those who are dearest to them. There is, in those who remain, a collective corona that still glows."